Hello and welcome everyone to Scientists in Action Visualizing Animal Acoustics. Now you may be thinking to yourself, I thought they were broadcasting from Bluff Lake Nature Center. Well, we thought the same thing. And then this morning, Denver metro area had some very wild weather. So apologies in advance. We are not live from the field as promised, but instead we are behind the scenes at the Denver Museum of Nature and Science, which is still pretty cool. We are in fact 55 feet below the museum in our zoology collection, which is a space that not many people get to see. So regardless, still a treat, and we're just glad that you joined us today. I'm your host, Kate, and we are so excited that some people are going to be joining us on camera, that you might have questions. We have two incredible scientists who are going to share knowledge with us in just a few minutes. But a couple things I want to touch base on before we get started. If you're going to be on camera asking questions, we're going to ask that you stay muted and off camera until we call on you in about 15 or so minutes for Q&A. If you are not going to be on camera and you have questions, love it. We have an open chat for that. So students, teachers, however you have your computer set up, you can be adding questions to that chat, and we'll make sure that our scientists get to hear them. So without further ado, I would love to introduce Erickson Smith as well as Tess Robeson. We have two naturalists here, and I'll let them talk a bit about their titles in a minute. But what do y'all do? What are we going to be talking about today? And take it away.
Great, thank you. Hey, my name is Erickson Smith. I am a wildlife specialist, and I work for Jefferson County Open Space. So Jefferson County is the county that's just west of Denver, where the foothills start turning into the Rocky Mountains. And we manage about 60,000 acres of parks that are free and open to the public. And so my job is to better understand and conserve the animal species that live on those parklands. So the reptiles and amphibians, birds, mammals, we study them. We try to manage our parks so that they can thrive and that we can create really rich nature-based experiences for our visitors.
Cool. Hi, everyone. My name is Tess Robeson. I'm the Natural Resource Manager at Bluff Lake Nature Center. My job is to maintain and protect the environment and the ecosystem there, as well as survey and monitor the different plants and animals we have in the area. I'll explain a little bit about Bluff Lake. So unfortunately, we're not actually there today, but we're here at the museum, which is also cool. But Bluff Lake is an urban wildlife refuge and outdoor classroom located in Denver, Colorado. We have about 123 acres of open space. Something really cool that you may not know, but when you're in the middle of the site, you're actually surrounded by buildings. So there are houses and industrial areas all around the park. But when you're right in the middle of it, you really can't tell that all that urbanization is there. And so it's really special that we get to manage this space without any development so that we can create really healthy habitats for some native plants and animals. Since time immemorial, the Cheyenne, Arapaho, and Ute peoples used the prairie in the Bluff Lake area. And for about 50 years, that area was fenced off as the crash zone for the Stapleton Airport. And the last 29 years, it's been run by our organization who have been restoring the landscape. And now we have over 450 animal species, as well as over 330 plant species. So before I talk any more about our topic today, I'll go ahead and send it over to the poll.
So we have a poll question for our friends who are watching. We want to know a little bit about how you observe animals. So what ways or tools have you used to observe animals? Could it be by camera? Maybe you use binoculars or a microphone. You could also just be using your eyes and ears. Those are great tools. Quite possibly you've used a combination of these as well. So it's more than one of these methods. So students, teachers, go ahead and survey, place your votes in that poll. How have you observed animals? All right, go ahead and take about 1 or 2 seconds more and place your answer in our poll if you've not done so already. And if you're struggling to find the poll, you can always post your answer in the chat. We can see that as well.
Very cool. Well, it's awesome to see that so many of you have been out using multiple methods of observing animals. All of these, there's no right answer. All of these are examples of active monitoring or active observation. So you all were out there using your eyes, ears, maybe some of your other senses, or technology like binoculars or cameras that enhance those senses to see animals or hear animals when you're out there yourselves. And what we'd love to introduce you to today is the concept of passive monitoring. So passive monitoring is when scientists like Tess and I use technology that we can put out in the field for extended periods of time to observe animals when we can't be there all the time. So the best examples of this are motion activated cameras that can take photos or videos of animals, or remote audio recording devices that can turn on at different times of the day to record the sounds that animals are making in a certain area. And there's a lot of really, really cool advantages of this technology. The first one being that there are some animals that are really, really sensitive to humans being in the area that they are, and they might act more elusively or secretively if humans are in the area. So you can use cameras or microphones to document the presence of that animal in an area without having to be there yourself. So for example, at Jefferson County, we're really interested in documenting which frog species are using different ponds for breeding. But one of the challenges is that when you walk up to a pond where frogs are calling, they'll actually feel the vibrations of your footfalls as you're approaching the pond. And when you get too close, they'll stop calling completely. They'll just be silent. So one way that we can get around this is by putting out an audio recording device and attaching it to a tree and have it listen for those frog calls for weeks on end. And we don't have to go out, only to change the batteries and collect the memory cards. And so we can get some really rich data on those frogs without them even knowing that we're there listening. Another great thing about passive monitoring equipment is that it minimizes the disturbance to the animals. So if Tess or I were really interested in what a particular deer is doing on a given day, if we follow that deer around, that deer might be thinking, is this a hunter? Am I at risk? Should I be stressed? And chances are that deer will probably be stressed after a while. But if we just put a camera out or a series of cameras out, we can get a lot of information about what that deer is doing. And that deer might exhibit behaviors that we wouldn't be able to see if it's aware that we're there and maybe it's modifying its behavior because we're there. It's also great for us because we can put these devices out and get a ton of data with relatively little effort. We could go sit out in the woods for 3 months, but that's not really realistic. But we can put a camera or a microphone out for 3 months and get a ton of data that we can still use, and it's really useful for the work that we do. And then finally, this equipment is really good for being in places that we might not be able to access all the time. So this winter, my colleague and I crossed a river in Jefferson County to put a camera on the other side, because in the summer, the water is so deep and fast that it's too dangerous to cross. But now that we have a camera there, we can monitor what the wildlife are doing on the other side of that river the entire year. We can go back next winter, retrieve the camera totally safely, and we have all that data now. So there are a lot of really, really cool applications for using this type of technology in the field.
Yeah, so Erickson, you kind of mentioned going out to the river and placing those cameras, but how else do you use these tools over at Jefferson County?
Yeah. So I'm really interested in bats. That's kind of what I specialize in. And bats are notoriously hard to observe because they're really small. They can fly pretty fast, and they're out at night when it's really dark. So it doesn't really make sense to go looking for bats with your naked eyes, because chances are you're not going to see much. So one way that we can study bats that's relatively new, and I think is super cool, is you can use ultrasonic recording devices. So microphones that can pick up sounds that are too high for us to even hear. They're out of the audible hearing spectrum. And so what I have here is one of the devices that we use. It's called a song meter. And so this microphone will pick up a bat call. So if a bat's flying by and its head is pointed towards the microphone, or even if it's in the general vicinity and it's loud enough, this microphone will pick the call up and it will transfer the call file to a memory card that's in this little computer here. And I can record, or I can program this recorder to turn on at certain times of day. So I have it usually turn on half an hour before sunset, and then have it listening for bats and recording bats that fly by the entire night. And then I'll have it shut off half an hour after sunrise to conserve the battery, because bats aren't going to be active during the day. It's battery powered. So if I want to leave it out for weeks or months, all I have to do is go replace the batteries, replace the memory card, and I'm good to go. And so you can also use these for the frogs. So like I mentioned, we use these for documenting breeding frogs in Jefferson County, and you just use a microphone that can pick up audible sounds that we can hear.
Yeah. So Erickson, with all that data you're collecting, how do you listen to everything you record?
Yeah, so we can't hear the calls. So we have to use special software that can help us interpret the data in a way that makes sense for us. So instead of hearing the data, we look at it. So what you're seeing on your screen now is what's called a spectrogram. So it's a visualization of sound. You have frequency on the y-axis and time on the x-axis. And what we're looking at right here is a chorus of boreal chorus frogs. So there's a lot of frog calls here that are overlapping. And so that's what a and right there, that call is a individual chorus frog. So you can kind of tell, it's hard to get an exact number, but you can tell, is there a lot of activity here? Is there a little activity? Is there a community of frogs, or is there a solo frog? Trying to find others. And then with the bats, it's really useful because we can't hear the audio, we can look at it. So this is a example of a fringed myotis bat call. So what we're seeing is the bat using echolocation, or bouncing sounds off of things in its environment, and then picking up the echoes off of those calls with its ears to gain information about its environment as it's flying. So this bat is flying along, sending out pulses of sound and getting information about maybe its surroundings, so it can navigate, or it's looking for food. This call file here is it's called a hoary bat, migratory bat, one of the biggest bats in Colorado. You can see it has a really, really different call. So bats, like birds, make different calls. And you can see that in the spectrograms because the shape of the call is different. Maybe the intensity of the call is different, the length, maybe how many pulses per second that they're making. So there are all these different characteristics of the calls that you can use to determine how many different species are in an area. And then you can also do things like you can learn about maybe their behavior and what they're doing in certain areas. So this is an example of a big brown bat call, one of our resident bats that hibernates here. So what's really cool about this call is it's hunting. So as bats are looking for moths or mosquitoes, maybe flying beetles, they're sending out the pulses. And when they find one, that pulse comes back, tells them that there's a food item that they might be interested in. And then as it gets closer, as it zeroes in, those pulses get quicker because there's less distance for that sound to travel to the prey and back to its ears. And so you can see it gets really, really, really close right at the end of the file, and then it stops. And it stops because that bat's mouth is now full of that food. So this is a really cool example of being able to see a species hunting. And so we can put these detectors out and get an idea of where bats might be foraging or might be hunting for the food that they eat. So acoustics are a really cool way of documenting different species in areas. You can use it for things you can hear and things you can't. But there's also the motion activated cameras. And I'm going to turn it over to Tess, who uses these in her work at Bluff Lake Nature Center.
Yeah, so these little guys here called game cameras or trail cameras or wildlife cameras are really helpful for us when we're trying to make some observations and do some monitoring. So if we're trying to see something in an area that maybe we can't be in all the time, we just don't have the time to stand out there for 3 months, these little cameras can be out there recording that data for us. Another thing they're really cool at is phenological monitoring, which is studying seasonal or periodic things like a leaf unfurling or the changing seasons. So this camera here is motion activated. So it's set up, and then when something passes by it, it'll activate and trigger, and it'll start taking a video. And so similar to the acoustic detector, it is also battery operated here. So that means we can just leave it out for really long periods of time. It'll just record a lot of data for us. And it has a memory card that stores all of that. So we can just go out in the field and collect that when we're ready to analyze that data. It has this really cool screen here. And so we're actually able to review some of that footage that it's already taken, as well as adjust some of the settings. So we could have it take a time lapse if we're looking at that changing season, or if something moves by really fast, we can have the video be captured for a smaller amount of time. So there's just a lot of different settings and ways that we can use this camera.
Where do you typically put them at Bluff Lake?
So a lot of times we hang them from like around trees that are facing out towards other trees or out at a meadow. So we can see any of those, any of that wildlife walking by, maybe if it's looking for food and foraging or eating. Another really cool one that I like putting out is under the boardwalk. So at Bluff Lake, we have this really cool boardwalk that people can go walk out on to a viewing platform over the lake. And that's great, but we can't see what's happening underneath. So there are all these animals and wildlife that are down there swimming, walking by that we can't see because we're up top. And so I'll take the camera and like tie it to that little pole you see. And so we can capture all of that footage. We can see who's under that boardwalk, and we can see what kind of behaviors or what they're doing, which is pretty cool. So it looks like we've got a little raccoon right there walking around.
Are they ever aware of the camera?
They can be sometimes. There is a little padlock on the bottom that can wave around in the wind that can sometimes alert them. For the most part, they're not, but like it looks like the beaver may have noticed something. So it is possible that they can see the camera.
What types of behaviors do you observe?
Yeah, so we got a lot of different ones. So here we see just a family of raccoons walking by. So a lot of travel just across the screen, but sometimes we can see like deer foraging or eating herbaceous plants. We can see owls flying around at night because they're mostly nocturnal, and so we don't really get to see those during the day. So this video here is a great horned owl, and it's actually standing on top of a prairie dog burrow. I think what's happening here is that it's caught sight of the camera, and so it's just trying to figure out what this camera is. But it's really cool because we get to see some of these things that we might not be able to see like during the day. And so with like the acoustic detectors and the game cameras, that's what we're using in our work. And it's really cool because a lot of different scientists use them for different things that they're looking at. So you could have a game camera set up near a nest and you can watch the birds and their behavior and various things like that. So it's pretty cool what these tools are able to tell us about the environment that we're studying.
Wow, this footage is so wild. I'm so envious that you both get to just listen and watch and observe all these animals doing some pretty cool things. And I guess this is a cool shot too. It highlights how those buildings are just right there, and yet there's all this wildlife thriving.
Yeah.
What is this thing that we're looking at here?
We're looking at a coyote.
Oh,
so that's very near a prairie dog colony. So it's probably out hunting for some food.
Very cool. Do you ever catch footage of the animals interacting with other animals, like other species even on camera?
Sure, yeah. I think we had a video of, there's the whitetail being chased by a coyote. I don't know if we can bring that up, but it kind of shows the white-tailed deer kind of running through or like through the field. And then momentarily you see a coyote like running behind it. So it's very interesting because you can see those interactions between the different animals as well, not just some of these that we're seeing, like these coyote and deer. So it's pretty cool.
Very cool. Well, there's so much to look at. And it just goes to show how many animals really live in this area that, without passive observation, we probably wouldn't get to see because they'd be
Exactly.
changing their behavior.
Mhm.
Very cool. So on that note, I'd like to switch gears a little bit and actually invite some of our on-camera schools to join us so that we can hear questions directly from them and I can stop talking. And let's see if we could go ahead and have our first group from Heather Rutledge's classroom in Kiffin Elementary. If you want to go ahead and join us with your camera on and your mic unmuted, we cannot wait to hear your questions. Hello, we can see you.
Hi. Wow. My first question is, can other animals hear the echolocation?
That is a great question. Yeah, so there's a pretty cool thing that some of the prey that bats eat can do. Some of the insects that bats eat have learned that the bats hunt them using echolocation. And these insects have figured out how to make a sound that's at the same frequency that the bat makes. So the bat's flying along, echolocating, looking for that moth or maybe a beetle or something like that. And when the insect gets hit with that sound, it starts sending out the sound at the same frequency. So it essentially jams the bat's call, or like jams its sonar. So the bat's call is going this way, the insect is going this way, they crash in midair, and the bat never gets the information from that prey item coming back to it. So some insects have learned that the bats are hunting them using sound and have figured out how to harness sound themselves to protect themselves from the predator. So yeah, great question.
That is wild. That's really cool. That was a great question. What's another question from Kiffin Elementary?
What got you into protecting the land and the animals?
Sure. Yeah. So I studied biology in college, and I just really enjoyed being outside, and I liked doing the science work outside. And so I kind of worked seasonally for a while trying to figure out what I wanted to do, but I always knew that I wanted to have some kind of impact. And I feel like what I'm doing does that because I am able to create really good homes for all these plants and animals, and make sure that they are healthy and thriving.
Yeah, I think as a kid, I loved being outside and I loved finding animals and learning about them. Read a lot of books about animals, and I think I read a book about a seahorse in second grade, and then that was it. I knew that I wanted to be a biologist. Caught lots of frogs as kids, turned over a lot of rotting logs to find salamanders and insects. And I think that taught me, maybe before I knew it, that having animals in the world around you makes life so exciting and interesting and rich. And I wanted that for everyone else. I felt really, really fortunate to have all these animals around me where I grew up. And I wanted to make sure that other people had that too in the future. And so I studied, like Tess, studied biology and got to work at some really amazing parks. And now I work at Jeffco, and there are so many animals there that people can see just out of their own backyard. And I think that's a really, really cool thing that we have here in Colorado. And I want to make sure that we keep having it.
Very cool.
Yeah, great question.
I love that passion guided both of you, and you just used a bunch of different ways to get where you are. What's another question from Kiffin Elementary?
What's the longest time you spent tracking an animal or area?
Ooh.
I didn't hear the question, sorry.
What's the longest time you spent tracking an animal?
Oh,
So there's a really cool technique called radio telemetry. And you've probably heard about maybe like radio collars or animals having collars on them to be studied. So with bats, what you can do is you can put a little antenna on the bat, and then that antenna sends out a signal that you can pick up basically with a radio. It's like a really, really specialized radio to pick up that frequency specifically. And it's kind of like a game of hot or cold. So the closer you get to the bat, the louder the sound is in your receiver box. And so what we would do is we would put antennas on bats to try to figure out where the mothers were spending the day together, because a lot of bat species form maternity colonies. So the mothers raise their young together, and those are really, really important places to protect because we want to make sure that the young get to the point where they can fly and start surviving on their own. So we would capture mothers, put little antennas on them, and then during the day we would search for them. And so sometimes it would take 8 hours of driving around with an antenna out the window trying to pick up that signal. And yeah, that's probably maybe 8 hours of following, trying to find this little bat in this little cliff somewhere in this huge space. That's probably the longest that I've
It's a
spent
very long time.
looking for one animal.
Would you say that's also the hardest? Someone in the chat is like, what was the hardest animal to track? I mean, that sounds pretty difficult. I don't know.
That's
you too,
pretty
guys.
hard, yeah, because like if the bat is in a crack in a certain way, like maybe it's in a crack and the crack is vertical, the signal from the antenna goes straight up. So you won't pick it up unless you're above the bat. So sometimes we'd just be walking around on these cliffs, just hoping that we'd pick it up. So yeah, bats can be really hard to find. Yeah.
Great questions. Let's get one last question from Kiffin Elementary before we invite our next schools on camera. So Kiffin, what's another question you might have?
How can you tell which bird call is which? Do you use any special tools for it?
Sure. I know some bird calls are pretty distinct. So just kind of, they're really cool resources to use online. The Cornell lab. Yeah, they have resources where you can go on and like search a bird and like listen to its calls. So a lot of it is just training your ear to recognize those sounds and kind of distinguishing it that way. But I know that there's a lot of other tools that we can use too.
Yeah, there's so with the software that I use for bats and frogs, you can also use it for birds. And so one cool thing you can do is, let's say you get 100 call files and 50 of them are frogs and 50 of them are birds. If you know what bird made the call, you can label the call file. You know, this was a black-billed magpie, and then this one was a red-tailed hawk, and then this one was a yellow warbler. And then you can train the software to recognize those calls for you in the future. And you're essentially writing an algorithm for the program to recognize them for you. So the next time you bring new data to the program and put it in, it'll say, hey, I think that this call is that yellow warbler that you saw 2 weeks ago. Or it's this, I think this is the red-tailed hawk. And it doesn't always get it right every time. But that's one way that you can, that's one tool you can use to identify bird calls. But as Tess said, a lot of it is memorization and just learning how to recognize a call. It's kind of like, you know, maybe you recognize a song on the radio because you've heard it so many times. A lot of it is just hearing a bird enough times that you start to recognize its voice. Yeah, great question.
Very cool. Yeah, those were awesome questions. Let's go ahead and invite our next group, Olivia Butler's crew from Mesa Elementary. If you'd like to unmute and join us on camera, we cannot wait to hear your questions as well.
How can you tell what the animal sounds mean?
Oop, I got the first half of that. If you could repeat that nice and clear. It might just be because we're 55 feet under that museum.
How can you tell what the animal sounds mean?
Oh,
You got that one?
Sure. Yeah. That's a really great question. And I think animal acoustics, there's a lot that we don't know. And what's really exciting about that as scientists, a lot of science is asking questions that we don't know the answers to, and searching for those answers. And that's really exciting because it means you're constantly learning. But we have over time, learned to identify different sounds for different animals. So for example, with birds, some bird species will have a song. And so they'll use that in the spring, maybe when they're looking for a mate. And that's for attracting other birds of the same species. They can also have a call, which is just more of a general like way to communicate with other members of their species. And then they might have like an alarm call that they can use either to alert other members of their species that there's a predator nearby, or just in general saying like, hey, something's wrong, and I'm just going to broadcast it out, and whoever gets to hear it benefits from that. Or they might use it to try to scare a predator away. So sometimes you have something like a peregrine falcon nesting, and they're really, really territorial. So if a predator, or even just a bird that they're not comfortable with being that close to their nest, flies by, like a golden eagle, the peregrine falcon will fly out of the nest and chase the golden eagle and make this call that's telling the eagle, hey, like I need you to leave, like you're way too close to my nest. And so I think the more we understand individual species, the better we get an idea of all the different sounds that they make. And by observing them while they're making different calls, we can kind of start associating them with different behaviors. Do you want to talk about prairie dogs and
Sure.
their sounds?
Yeah, so over at Bluff Lake, we have a prairie dog colony. And so they are like a small little rodent, and you'd be surprised by how intricate their calls can be. So they do have, like Erickson was talking about, the different kinds of calls. They have an alarm call that if you have ever walked by a prairie dog colony, like maybe along the trail and there's one there, it'll start chirping. And so that is an alarm call it has. But in addition to that, they can communicate pretty well with each other. Like they can indicate that, like if I was walking by, they'd be like, oh, somebody in green is walking by, which is so cool that they have like that intricate vocalization that they're able to communicate together.
Wow, what a good question that was. We got some great stories out of it too. What's another question from Olivia Butler's group?
How long did it take to get the Bluff Lake Nature Center started?
Oh, how long did it take?
So Bluff Lake has a very interesting history. So I briefly touched on that before it was a nature center, it was an airport buffer zone. So right at the edge of the airport, if anything like planes crashed, it would crash somewhere where there weren't humans. And so that was set up kind of as that buffer area. And so then in 1994, which was about 29 years ago, the city and county of Denver, their Department of Aviation, kind of gave Bluff Lake over to the organization to be run as a nature center. And so since then, there's been a lot of infrastructure improvements. So like storage that went in, shade structures, trail systems. And we're kind of seeing that history on the screen that as the years go by, there's so much more development around Bluff Lake. And so Bluff Lake, is that green area you're kind of seeing right in the middle. And so the center is kind of just continually added improvements and added staff so that we can keep it running as a nature center. And so, it's taken about 30 years to get where we are today, which is pretty cool.
Wow, I really like those aerial shots too, because you can see that Denver skyline and some of the buildings and things, and it's just this little oasis of nature and animals, and I don't know, that's really neat. Without folks like you, obviously this wouldn't exist. So this is the dock we were supposed to be broadcasting from today. Bittersweet. Let's go ahead and get another question from Olivia Butler's group.
Has anyone ever hunted your animals?
Oh, I don't know that I caught that one. If you could repeat it again.
Has anyone ever hunted your animals?
Oh, hunted the animals.
So we do not allow hunting on site because we are a wildlife refuge. We want to be a place where these animals feel welcome and they're safe, and providing really good habitat for them to keep living, because that's what we want. We want all these species here so we can see them as we walk through the park, as well as just providing homes. So we don't allow hunting. As far as I'm aware, I don't think we've ever had somebody come and try to do that on site. It is a pretty small site, so it also is not very desirable for people to come out and do that kind of thing.
That was a good question.
Mhm.
Let's get one last question from Olivia Butler's group, and then we will invite our last school on camera, or our last classroom, I guess.
How many animals do you have in your facility?
Yeah, so what's really cool, so the short answer is just over 450, give or take. And so we've collected that number from observations that like Erickson and I have made, as well as we use the community to help us see things that because we can't be on site all the time. So we do use our game cameras, but then if other people see something, they can record it and we collect that data, and we've compiled this master list of all the different species that we have. So yeah, it's about just over 450 animal species. And then that's also throughout the seasons, because sometimes they migrate south, like birds would migrate south for the winter, but then they come back. So it's not always that we have that number on site, it's throughout the seasons.
Very cool. This is kind of relating to a chat question. Someone has asked, do you have any rare animals, I guess, in that number that you mentioned?
Sure. Wouldn't say rare, we have some rare plants that the botanical garden has come out and inventoried for us. But in regards to rare animals, I don't think so. I know we have some species like the bald eagle and golden eagle that are on a protected list that fly through. I don't think any of those have ever stayed at Bluff Lake for very long, but they do pass through.
There's a bird called a golden crowned sparrow that isn't rare where it's normally found, which is in like Washington and the West Coast. But for a couple winters, there's actually been one hanging out at Bluff Lake, and it's not entirely clear why it's here. Maybe it was migrating and got blown off course, but it tends to hang out with a sparrow that's pretty similar called a white crowned sparrow. So a lot of people go to Bluff Lake to see this flock of white crowned sparrows with the one golden crowned sparrow, and very, very rare for Colorado for a golden crowned sparrow to be here. So that's pretty cool.
Oh, that was a great question. Let's go ahead and invite our last group on camera. So that's going to be Rochelle Krumpeck's group. If you want to go ahead and unmute and have your camera on, we cannot wait to hear a couple questions from you.
Can the most motion sensor cameras take photos of the animals?
I don't know that I caught the very last part of that. Can motion sensor cameras take pictures of, did you say humans?
Can the motion sensor cameras take photos instead of videos too?
Yes, yeah. So it functions as a camera as well as video taking equipment. So we can put the setting to make it take pictures instead. Yeah, and so we can set if it's like triggered, so we can make it motion sensing as well. So if it's triggered, we can set how many pictures it takes. It could take like a couple pictures in a row, or it could take a picture and then wait a couple seconds. And so, yeah, that is an option that we have as well.
That was a cool question. What's another question from Krumpeck's crew?
Stephanie, that's right here. How do machines visualize sound?
Yeah, great question. So basically, the way that software works is it takes the sound file, and it takes the data in that sound file, which is, it's basically what's in that sound file is there are a lot of different frequencies that are happening in a certain order across time. And so what you can do is you can have the software show that data instead of in a sound file or in an audio form, you can have it in a visual form. So like as a JPEG. So what this is showing down at the bottom of the graph there is time. So that's like, I'm not entirely sure what the unit is. It looks like 10 milliseconds. So that's basically the length of the recording. And then all the color is showing the sound that's happening by the different frequencies that the bat's producing. And so it's showing it graphically, basically by plotting the different frequencies the bat's making on a graph, where the frequency is on the y-axis and then the time of the sound file is on the x-axis. So it's maybe that's not the best explanation. It's pretty interesting, but it's basically like a way of visualizing sound. And so like and I think you can maybe hear it. So this is the audio that you're hearing is basically what's being portrayed in this image, but slowed way down so that our ears can hear it. But yeah, the computer is able to graphically represent the sound using the frequency and the time data in the sound file.
Very cool. One thing that I like that you just did too, Erickson, is you essentially answered another question that someone posted in the chat, which was like, how do we hear these things? And it sounds like by using technology and slowing it down, we can actually hear it ourselves, since it might be out of that human hearing range.
Right.
Let's get one last classroom question from Rochelle from PEC's crew. What is your last question for us, dear friends?
Have you ever forgotten a camera out there and then something really cool happened?
Oh no. Yeah, have you?
I don't think so.
You always have the camera handy when cool things happen?
Well, because how we set them up is that it's kind of randomly around the site. And so we have at Bluff Lake 4 cameras that we have out at one time. So it is quite possible that something cool is happening and the camera just isn't set up in that area. So I know right now we have a lot of beaver activity. And for these 2 weeks that I put the cameras out at these specific spots, they're not really in any areas where there are beavers. So I'm probably missing some beavers, maybe chewing on some trees or walking back and forth.
I know last summer they captured a porcupine on camera at Bluff Lake, which is really cool because porcupines are usually associated with mountains and trees. So how a porcupine made it all the way out to Bluff Lake from the mountains, I don't know, but it was the first porcupine ever observed in that area. So that's pretty cool.
That is cool. I would definitely like to see a porcupine. Oh, there it
There it
is.
is.
Just sniffing some grass or something. Pretty cool. Well, on that note, we are kind of running out of time. So are there any things that you would like to leave our students with today? How could they maybe become scientists themselves, use these tools or things like it, check out nature and observe a porcupine in the wild?
Yeah. So there's lots of ways that you all at home can contribute to this community science that we can all do. So there are lots of free ways to do this. So there's an app and website called iNaturalist, where you can make an observation, whether it's in your backyard or in your neighborhood of a living thing. You could take a picture of it or just describe it. And that observation gets posted and a lot of people can access it. So it's quite possible that a scientist is working on something on a project and your data actually helps them out. So it's really cool because we can all be a part of that. Another app is called Seek, that actually, when you look at a picture you've taken or looking at the living thing, it will help you identify it, which is pretty cool. And yeah, technology is a great way to be able to contribute to that.
Yeah, if anyone's interested in exploring sound and the type of work that I do, there's this really, really cool app called Merlin. And Merlin is made by the Cornell Lab of Ornithology, which is the one of the leading bird research organizations in the country. And this app is totally free. And it has this really cool feature called Sound ID. And the way it works is you have the app on your phone, you hit Sound ID, and you allow it to turn your microphone on. And if there are any birds calling in the area, it'll actually tell you in real time which species is making that call. And it'll show the call in that spectrogram that I was showing you with the visual representation of the sound. And so what you can do is you can record birds, save them to your phone, and build your own call library of birds that you've heard. And that would be a really awesome way to start recognizing different bird calls. So yeah, lots of really cool free opportunities online and on our smartphones these days.
Very cool. We'll make sure to share out those resources to your teachers as well, so that in that post-program email we always send out, you can hopefully get a hold of some of those amazing resources if you've not used them already. Before we sign off for today's session, couple people I want to thank, of course. We have Asa and Kim off camera, who you can't see because they're making the technology happen. Thank you, of course, Erickson. Thank you, of course, Tess, for being so flexible and joining us today. And not Bluff Lake Nature Center, unfortunately, but also a pretty cool space. Thank you, of course, everyone who's been on camera or off camera asking questions. Without them, we wouldn't get to hear all these really cool stories. So thank you so much. If you enjoyed today's program, we hope you'll come back and enjoy another program with us. We are going on summer hiatus, but we will be back in September of this year and starting up with more programs. If you're in the Denver area as well, you can of course come visit Jefferson County or Bluff Lake Nature Center. And if you're out of state, that's okay too. Go outside, use these tools, observe animals in the wild, and be a scientist. So thank you so much. We can't wait to see you again.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.